Blog Talk Radio.
Paranormal Review Radio.
Hello and welcome, everyone. It is Friday night, and you are listening to Paranormal Review Radio with your host, Anthony Agati in New York.
And I'm Lucy Liebfreak from Chicago. Are you ready for another Paranormal Friday night? We are so happy that you can join us tonight. We welcome all of our regular listeners and those of you who have tuned in for the very first time. Now, if you have a question for our guest or about the topic tonight, feel free to ask us in the chat room or call into the show at 661-244-9831. We will try to get to you as soon as we can. Now, don't forget you can always send us an email with future topics that you'd like to see on our show, or if you just want to say hi. Our email address is paranormalreviewradio@yahoo.com. And last but not least, check us out on our Facebook show page and our YouTube channel for more information on the paranormal and upcoming shows.
One of the most fascinating paranormal cases to have ever been in the public's eye is still the subject of debate even after almost 40 years. I'm talking about none other than the Amityville horror at 112 Ocean Avenue in Long Island, New York. There have been countless books written about the Amityville case and a slew of motion pictures and documentaries, most of which were taken from the testimony and inclusion of George and Kathy Lutz. But what about their children? Christopher, Melissa, and Danny were also in that home, but little has been known about what they experienced firsthand until now. Eric Walter, a native of Maryland, is a writer, director, and documentarian specializing in the exploration of the unexplained. Eric began writing and producing original short subject films at a very early age, refining his artistic skills in nearly every medium he could lay his hands on. In 2008, Eric moved to Los Angeles to pursue his career in the film industry. His continued research into infamous unsolved mysteries fed his desire to pursue documentary filmmaking. He has consulted on numerous investigative projects for both television and radio, and has recently completed his first feature film for 2013, My Amityville Horror, which is the subject for tonight's show. Do you believe in the Amityville horror really happened, or do you think it was all a hoax? Well, let's find out what Eric Walter uncovered in his film, and then make up your own mind. Please help me in welcoming Eric Walter to the show. Hi, Eric. Welcome to the show. How are you?
Hi. It's good to be here. I'm great.
Hi, Eric. It is a pleasure to have you on the show. I have to say, for someone as young as you to create your first feature film like this, and it's so powerful and so thought-provoking, this really blew my mind. Now, it's an amazing piece of work, but I want to ask you, why the Amityville case?
Well, that's a good question. It kind of takes me back to my childhood, actually. I've always had an innate interest in the unexplained, ghost stories, true cases of paranormal phenomena, UFOs, true crime, this type of, subject matter. And so since I've been very young, Amityville was kind of my main interest. It was one of the stories that I read the book by Jay Anson when I was about 10 years old, just around that age. And, I found it at the local library and was, totally enamored with the story because, you not only have a family who was claiming to have gone through an alleged demonic attack in their home, but also, the previous family that lived there, the DeFeo family, was, there was a mass murder that occurred in the house. 6 of the family members there, Ronald and Louise DeFeo and their children were shot to death in their beds in 1974. And so, being totally interested in the story and trying to know more, I began putting together and researching a lot of the story, and also going to Amityville, like you mentioned. I'm from Maryland originally, and going to New York and actually going to the Historical Society, going to the house. I never actually been in the house, unfortunately, which I think a lot of us out there would love to have that opportunity. But it's privately owned now. So really, it was kind of getting a sense of the property and sense of the area, and just being totally wrapped up in the mystery that is this story, and trying to uncover what other truth actually lies beneath, a lot of the claims that have been made about this house over the years. So I ended up developing what I call an online archive, basically, which is a compilation of all of my research, which was the, court transcripts and also images and things like this, and also newspaper archive that I collected and gathered from different friends I made online and this type of thing, and kind of put together an archive called AmityvilleFiles.com, which is a place people could kind of go and, formulate their own opinion. It was kind of an unbiased perspective on a story that's been dragged through the mud for almost 35 years now. There's so many varying opinions about where the truth of this story lies. And so that was my interest in kind of looking at it objectively. And, that is the role of a documentarian, to look at something objectively. So I think I was kind of primed for this project even before I started it.
So what are your beliefs in the paranormal, and how much of your beliefs influenced the direction of the film?
Well, I've always had, in terms of my belief in the paranormal, personally, I have had EVP experiences myself. I haven't told too many people about them, but it's interesting. I've with my father and one of my best friends when I was a kid, I was about 17, and we went into a local cemetery that was supposedly haunted. There were a lot of local stories and folklore about this particular area, and we had taken several different digital recorders and also an analog recorder into the cemetery. And I began recording, and we got several different voices on the recordings that I can't deny, that people who were there with me who heard these voices. And ever since that happened to me, I knew there was some, validity to something. There was definitely something much more to this subject matter. However, I find it difficult to pinpoint and say exactly what it is. Since that, I haven't done too much more investigation in terms of actually going and ghost hunting myself. I've done it several other times with friends and this type of thing, but that isn't typically my foray. Really, I've been interested in filmmaking and exploring it also from an investigative point of view. And also, my interest primarily in the Amityville case has been the personalities that surround the story. I really think that many of the other stories, I could list them, off the cuff, different hauntings and also violent, supposed demonic attacks on different families have actually trumped a lot of what the Lutzes discussed in terms of their violent nature, in terms of like the extremes that they go to. But I think it was the combination of people that were involved with the Amityville case: George and Kathy Lutz, Ronnie DeFeo Jr., the parade of skeptics that came in afterwards trying to debunk the story. And so it was kind of all under one roof, this perfect storm of the paranormal that I think really helped Amityville to gain its legs and has carried it from here to, where it is now, which is now, a Hollywood subgenre.
Mm-hmm. Well, Danny Lutz is the eldest son of the Lutz family that lived in the house. Now, for so many years, the kids never really talked about their experiences, let alone film their story. How did you get Danny to film his story?
Well, it's interesting. Through the website that I actually developed that I mentioned, AmityvilleFiles.com, I was contacted by a friend of Daniel's, a contractor in the Queens area of New York, and who said that Danny was interested in coming forward and telling his story publicly. And initially, I was very skeptical of this. I didn't believe that this, that it was even him, and I've had other people email me through this website and claim all kinds of things, that they have furniture that was in the house when the Lutzes were there and they want to sell it to me, and, things like this because they know you have an interest in it too. So initially I was, skeptical, in trying to make sure, back up that this was a valid claim being made, and, talking to this person and finally talking with Danny on the phone, once I saw a photograph of him that his friend passed on to me, I realized that immediately that it definitely was Daniel, just because of the striking resemblance he had to his mother, Kathy. And so it was, after that, I flew to New York in August of 2009, and I met with Daniel Lutz. And, you go in, I'd heard several other things from his brother at different times, talking in different articles. When George Lutz was still alive, he was involved in a lawsuit with George Lutz, and I knew that there was, some heated tension between the boys and George. And so, that had been a kind of an unexplored territory in the story. I knew that there was, definitely much more in terms of the family dynamic that was going on there. And you can't deny that. Anybody that goes through this type of unexplained occurrence, trying to rationalize that to the public is definitely not the easiest of scenarios. So I knew that there was much more there than had ever been talked about that lie beneath the unexplained occurrences. So talking with Danny, I was kind of expecting, I guess, something, a person similar to his brother. And his brother, of course, is talked in, like I mentioned, various, online forums, a couple of TV shows, but he's never gone to the point of actually explaining everything that happened to him in the house. And, of course, these were very young kids. Danny was 9 at the time. Christopher was 7, and his sister was 5 years old at the time. So these were very, very young kids. And so, keeping that in mind, that their memory could be skewed with many of the interpretations of things that they've seen over the years. So I went into it, knowing that in the back of your mind, allowing him to just talk, essentially. And the person that I encountered, and if anybody's ever seen my Amityville Horror, the documentary, they can tell immediately that Danny was extremely volatile and angry about, essentially wearing the label of the Amityville Kid his entire life, but also, I think, trying, wrestling with whether to go public or not, whether to having to, step. It's almost like a fatal attraction, I keep saying to people. Like, I think it's something that he's not happy to have been, to be going public with, but it's something that he feels he must do to vindicate himself of this story, to have his say. And he definitely says in the film that the one thing that he regretted when he was a child was never having a voice, was being essentially silenced. And so he, being the oldest in the family, definitely in terms of the children at the time, he would have been the most likely to remember things. So I think what My Amityville Horror is for people going in to watch it, it represents the blurry line between, reality and imagination, and what this story represents, and also the Amityville Horror through a child's eyes, essentially. And there are many times in the film when you see this, when he's going back to that dark place, back to the memories that have haunted him for almost 35 years now, you can see that he takes on a childlike quality in those different scenarios. And that, I think, the reality of that for him, whether or not you believe it's true or not, you cannot deny, his veracity in that moment. And I know that I believe that he believes it's true. Do I believe everything he's saying? I don't. And we can get into that. But, we can go and talk all day long about everything, about George and Kathy Lutz's, claims, and there were a lot of things they said that didn't match up. And again, there was just, there's so much in there that I find personally hard to swallow, but also, it's really based on your perception. And you asked, what's my belief in the paranormal? I mean, it really it does depend upon your beliefs, in this type of phenomena. So if people have gone through this themselves, they maybe were obviously apt to believe in this type of phenomena and these type of claims. So I think everyone watching the film will definitely pull something away from it, which will, everyone pull something different away from it, which actually I'm glad that it's left open-ended that way.
I mean, Lucy and I have both seen this movie, and honestly, I mean, Eric, kudos to you. This is a really powerful movie, and I some people talk about and they criticize either the filmmaking itself or the cast or the people that are intended to be documented in it. And to be honest, I really think it's to me, it's both. It's the way that the film was made, as well as Danny's contribution and all of the reporter Laura and everybody else that's in that movie. I mean, both that and the way that the film was made is so powerful. I could not even lift my eyes off of watching this thing. I could not be distracted at all, and that's how powerful it was. And you just mentioned just before that the film sort of touches on all the points and it sort of treads on that fuzzy line of part reality and part imagination through, the young eyes of Danny Lutz. But did you first start out the film, or did you first start out to film this documentary in one direction, and during the film, maybe the direction had sort of changed by the way, or from the contribution that maybe whatever Danny was speaking or talking about, or some of the other experts that he had on, did it change somehow as opposed to when you first, set foot to behind that camera?
Well, being, again, it all is about being objective with material. I didn't go in with an agenda. I didn't go in with an idea of what I was going to do with the piece other than creatively how I was going to shoot it and how I was going to do it. And obviously, as you mentioned, which I appreciate your comments on the film, my intention was to shoot this very cinematically and to produce it not as a run-and-gun documentary, but something that would, because of the preconceptions that go along with all of the other Amityville films, there's almost, I think, 12 or 13 now, including, with the remake and all the,
right,
direct-to-video movies and things in the 90s. If you add all of those up, there definitely are preconceptions that people have with anything with the Amityville horror title in it. So we wanted to make this a very cinematic experience and something that people could immediately relate to and also, find entertaining as well as informative. In terms of how I approached it, I would say that an open canvas. I mean, obviously, I had my opinions about the story itself, but I had never talked to any of the children directly. And Danny coming out of the woodwork after 35 years to talk about this was a unique opportunity, but something that I felt did not need to be, how should I say it? Like, I shouldn't try to sell the story out, I guess, or try to do what Hollywood had done for so many years, which is throw whatever truth remains out the window and focus only on, the haunting and only on the events. And the person that I met, Daniel Lutz, there was so much more there than just the haunting. The haunting had haunted him, and that was the main thread that I was getting from talking to this person. There are many different times where I could tell, at least my opinion, and the film goes into these, or different psychologists talk about it in the film, that it seemed Danny could not differentiate different elements of what, scenes from the films and the books and things that he's heard over the years that may or may not have skewed his perspective on what happened in the house. Now, I can't say that conclusively because I wasn't there, but obviously that is a suspicion, and I don't think it's any I don't think it's something that you can blame him on. It's really a very tragic picture. It's something that he grew up and it more or less was indoctrinated into the Amityville horror. So it's something that that was the story that I was after primarily. Obviously, to tell the story through a child's eyes was also something that was obviously the main focus point of what the events were, but also something that he says said to me during the course of the film, making the film in one of the interviews, was that he remembers things in the order of severity. And if that makes any sense to the listeners, that, he doesn't remember it day 1 to 28. He remembers it, he talks about being thrown up the stairs and other, violent paranormal incidents.
Right.
These are things that I can imagine, which made sense to me. I can imagine if I went through this that I would probably, my mind would cite those incidents first because they stick out of my mind. His hands being slammed in the window, which is definitely a major point in the original film, and it's also a major point in Jay Anson's book. It's incidents like that I think that his mind immediately goes to. And, that... So, to sum it up, I think that, yes, it's definitely, like I mentioned, it was an open canvas, and I think his outlook on the film, I mean, again, as indicated in the title, My Amityville Horror, it's his the real horror. The real Amityville horror, for me, is the deep psychological trauma that this person was not only subject to, but now has been, it's manifested in his adult life. And that was the real story that I felt was extremely important for people to see, and I think also kind of transcended the topic of Amityville and talked about anything that a young child, how people interpret, beliefs, your belief in the paranormal, your belief in God, how this can affect your outlook, how people deal with the unexplained, and how this can change someone's life. And so I think there were just many, many deep, profound topics there that, again, transcended just the haunting itself. And so those were the things that I think steered, and like any good documentary would, you can't go in with, an agenda to tell a certain story unless you're trying to make strictly entertainment. Then it wouldn't be a documentary.
Right. You're following the story and letting it happen. You're not. There's nothing. Right. There's no script or anything. It's not scripted or staged. It's you're recording what is in front of you. Basically, is what it is.
That's correct. And when I first arrived in 2009, I had a digital recorder and a set of about 100 black and white photographs of different shots in the house. Several of which, a nice good stack of them, were the original investigation photographs from March 6, 1976 of the investigation that the Warrens held in the house that Laura DiDio, who is the investigative reporter that interviews Danny, was present for. Mm-hmm. I was showing Danny these photos, and I had the digital recorder rolling, and, you could just feel the years coming off of his chest. Just some of these photos he had never seen before. Mm-hmm. Of course, he's seen, he remembered, of course, the infamous Ghost Boy photograph and things like this, but he was actually looking at different toys that were on the shelf next to his bed and, saying, I never got any of my stuff back. I never got any of this back. Mm. And so it was definitely extremely interesting for me, when I started this project, I was 24, I'm now 28, so this has been going on quite a good chunk of my life too. So it's pretty incredible. But for me, as a young person, to sit there and actually be someone who's very interested in the story, but also talking to Danny at the time, you could definitely tell. It was extraordinary. It was just, you could tell that this, he had not only never seen any of these photographs, but there was definitely, there was real hurt there. But also I sent a sense of confusion about it. Again, rationalizing unexplained.
Well, let's touch on that for. Let's touch on that for a little bit, because watching the movie, it completely engaged me in whenever I had, whenever there were the scenes with Daniel and, him talking about his story, or even him just reacting to questions or to the people that you had in the film. It was very engaging and it was very intense. Now, I'm feeling that as a viewer. How difficult was it to sit across the table from him and listen to his story, or even in some instances, take on the wrath of his rage and continue with the filming? How difficult was that?
Well, you kind of have to, I wouldn't say, how do I say, detach yourself from being emotionally involved in terms of having that conversation and not getting in an argument.
Right.
Obviously, the first time the very first thing that we actually shot with him was that first person interview where he was looking directly into the camera, which I did that interview, and it was the very first day of shooting, and he's looking directly into the camera, which I felt was the most appropriate way to shoot this, because I had the experience of when I first met with him, we were on a boat in Long Island, and in like an apartment, like a studio apartment, a little apartment in the boat. And so we were down talking, and Danny's sitting there staring, sitting across the table from me and talking, and I was recording, and he's just talking this entire time and looking, me straight in the eye. And it was that feeling, that uncomfortable feeling, the intensity that, the dramatic element from him, you could definitely, obviously I was sensing it, and I was thinking the entire time, being a filmmaker, that I needed to put the audience in my shoes. So that was what I chose to do for the filming of that interview was to literally have him looking directly at the camera, and I think that was a wise choice because it definitely ramps up the intensity for the audience. But, you know, there also is a theatricality to Danny, you know, in my opinion. You know, he's very emotionally invested and involved in the story, no doubt. And, you know, his anger towards the stepfather, George, again, trying to rationalize the incidents, and, you know, when I would press him on different things, you know, he would definitely lash out and get, you know, defensive about certain topics. You know, and so you just have to have a lot of respect. You know, I can understand, you know, it's difficult to go back to that place, but also he made the choice, so I have to ask, you know, I was never afraid to go anywhere with him. So, you know, but there were so many different stories thrown out there in the post-production process, it definitely was very difficult to make sense of a lot of the things that were talked about because there was so much on the table. Hopefully, the DVD of My Amityville Horror will be releasing on August 6th from ISC Films, and there's a featurette and a commentary track and some other things that will include a little bit more insight into the process that we went through to make the film, which I think people will find interesting.
Awesome, yeah.
But primarily, we, you know, during that interview, if anybody's seen the film, they remember I asked Danny about taking a polygraph test, and it was actually the last question I asked him because at the very end of that, you know, we had done this for nearly 8 hours. We were having this interview, so it was a very long day. It was very hot in there, and this was in Danny's, you know, garage where he keeps his guitars and his stuff, you know, his hangout place. And so he immediately, you know, he took an offense to me asking that question because he had just taken almost 8 hours essentially pouring his heart out on the table to not just me, but the entire room of people he doesn't know, that, you know, the director of photography, the camera operators, and we really tried to strip the set of people who didn't need to be there. It was only the technical people who were kind of in the back running things, you know, and myself. But even having those people present there, we don't know them and you're talking about this sensitive subject, it is definitely, you know, it's difficult. So, but also he knows that this is being recorded for the world, essentially. So there was a lot of pressure there, and given this is the first time he'd ever talked about it publicly, you know, I knew where he was coming from. So I think that, you know, a lot of people, it's been interesting looking at the reaction from people on that. You know, a lot of people have a lot of anger about why he, you know, says no to that, you know, essentially. But he does, if you listen, he actually says, yes, I would. But he kind of skirts the question, you know. But I think it was, my opinion is, having been there and talked to him afterward, is that, you know, he felt his credibility was being questioned. And because, again, he had just told this entire account, and then I asked him, you know, would you be willing to take a lie detector test, as if to suggest that he's lying. That wasn't my intention, but, you know, it was taken that way. But I think it does leave the film, I think it leaves, you know, for that to be the end of the film, essentially, for him to stop the recorder and to go to black, it leaves you with that question, which was this a horror, was this a hoax? And that will always be part of the Amityville horror in terms, well, the Lutz side of it anyway, because no one will ever be able to prove whether or not, unless we develop a time machine and go back to find out what happened when they were there, no one will ever be able to prove one way or another what happened there. You know, you have 5 different perceptions of what happened there. You know, Christopher has spoken in various things. Maybe he'll come out in, you know, a larger venue now to talk now that Danny has. We'll see what happens. You know, their sister has never really talked, you know, ever about it, and I think, you know, I respect that, and I can understand why she wouldn't at the time. She was very young. So, and George and Kathy are now passed away. So, you know, there's definitely no way, you know, I think people are looking for the truth of the matter, and it's unattainable in this case. So what we're left with are people like Daniel Lutz, who went through something clearly happened there. Has he dealt with it the best way? You know, that's for people to interpret, and that's what the film provides a platform for doing.
Well, in the film, Danny starts off by explaining the experience he encountered at the Amityville house as an unfortunate gift. So what do you take from that description?
Right. It is interesting because he talked about how, you know, he had told me, and it's in the film as well, when he talked with a psychologist in the film about having, you know, different people in the town knew him by the names of characters in the film, You know, he's a UPS driver, so he's a truck driver, and he's going around at different places in the Whitestone, Queens, New York area, and they knew him by name from the movie, other character names, which I believe one was Billy and the other one was Greg from the original movie. So it's, while it's humorous and, you can chuckle at it, it's also extremely tragic, because in that instance, in that part where he's talking with a psychologist in the film, he says that, that he almost alludes that there's Daniel is protecting Danny, the 10-year-old boy that's still inside him. Mm-hmm. And to me, I don't know, that's the most, for a lot of people, I've seen people talking about that. That definitely is one of the more profound and heartbreaking moments in the film. And so, yeah, I think that in many ways, obviously those people who know him by the character name, I don't know how they know that. So he had to have told them somehow, So it's always been a question, myself, actually, with that. So it's very interesting. It is, like, as I mentioned, I think in many ways this whole story is a little bit of a fatal attraction for, at least for Danny. I can't say that about the other people because I haven't interviewed them first person myself.
Well, you talked about how when Daniel talked about protecting Danny, and I will, I got to tell you, this film did make me cry. And as intense and as powerful as this film is, I can't imagine anything being left on the cutting room floor during, editing. Was there anything that you didn't include in the film, or that Danny didn't want to be put in for whatever reason?
There was nothing that Danny didn't want to be put in terms of incidences, and there wasn't any major incidents that I left out, other than things that I personally, as someone who, me and maybe, a handful of the people who know the case, inside and out, that have listened to every single interview with George Lutz, that would know details that, Danny talks about. For instance, yes, there were other things left out of the, the interview was 8 hours and the film was 90 minutes, so there you go. So if that makes any sense to you, but for instance, there was a George Lutz had always talked about when they first moved into the house, that up on the second floor that they had discovered pills scattered around in the hallway, and I believe in a few of the rooms, and so this was just a strange. His strange claim. And so Danny actually brought that up during the interview, which I found pretty interesting. But it's one of those tidbits that, isn't necessarily related to the haunting itself, but it was an interesting thing that kind of rang true to me, being that I know that Danny hasn't, at least my suspicion, I don't think that he's, having known him personally, I don't think he's been listening to all these interviews with George Lutz. Mm-hmm. So, I don't think that he, had heard that one interview that had been done, because I think it's my belief that George had only mentioned that once or twice, maybe, on a few, on several occasions, but someone could probably tell me that at some point. But the point is that Danny, he had, mentioned that, so it rang true. But again, those tidbits aren't really, for the, we had to keep, as a storyteller, as a filmmaker, you have to kind of keep the story going and keep moving with the narrative. Mm-hmm. So it was definitely difficult being so close to the flame in terms of the story, at times, to kind of separate yourself and look at it as a filmmaker and say, this is what needs to be there. But I still think, there definitely is an insider-ish element to the film, most assuredly. I think that anybody who knows the story is going to get a lot more out of it. And even people that don't know the story definitely get the story again, but more in a brief, the original story more in a brief presentation. And this primarily focuses on the first-person perspective of Daniel Lutz.
Well, knowing what you know now after doing the extensive research, even before you thought about doing the film, and then now after filming, do you feel that whatever paranormal phenomena happened in that house has any connection to the DeFeo murders, or was it more about the Lutz family and attachment to them specifically?
That's a very good question, and something I think everybody is grappling with. In terms of the DeFeo family, I do believe that if there was an actual haunting, and I do believe that something unexplained, something happened to this family, to the Lutzes, that the mass murder, the negative energy left after those, murders in that house definitely had something to do with that. I feel that. It was actually interesting. I won't say that Danny doesn't believe that it has anything to do with the haunting, but Danny actually mentioned to me at one point that he believed that if he and his natural father and his mom Kathy and they had all moved into his house without, and it hadn't been George, that none of this would have happened. And I found that was a pretty profound statement, and obviously an indicator of how much animosity had built up not only between stepfather George, but also in what George and who and what George represented in Daniel's life at the time. But what he felt was the true culprit of the haunting. Daniel and his brother has also mimicked this idea that George was involved in the occult and actually was practicing different occult rituals in the house when he was there. George and Kathy Lutz actually talked about practicing transcendental meditation, which definitely isn't anything occult based. It's always been my suspicion that a child witnessing your parents practicing TM or being in the floor meditating or something may interpret this as being some sort of occult activity. Mm-hmm. So I've always wondered what that was a part of. I don't think that it's that far-fetched an idea to think that George had an interest in the occult. However, do I think that George manifested the haunting and it made it occur to the family? I would say that I find that pretty hard to swallow. So my personal opinion is yes, if the haunting was indeed happening to the family the way they claimed it did, that it definitely had something to do with the murders and residual energy left in the house afterward. Because you can't have that much that much negative energy expelled in one area in that short amount of time go by. Not only that, the Lutzes were using the bed frames that the DeFeo family had been killed in. So essentially, George Lutz was allowing his children to sleep in the same beds. It certainly wasn't the same mattresses, but they were the same bed frames and a lot of the same furniture that they had bought from the DeFeo estate, and they did that because it was just a good deal. And they claimed at the time that they were not superstitious, and this, there was no reason not to. And I think George said, the stuff was there, so we just decided to do it. Obviously, I think that was probably an unwise choice in hindsight. But there are many, many different indicators there of things that could or could not have been triggers for the haunting itself.
Well, it's kind of strange because I've heard people talk about what you just said in particular, that and Danny had mentioned that if George never moved into that home, none of this would have happened. But obviously, George was living somewhere prior to this home, and I believe Kathy was living with him as well before they moved into the address at 112. So I would assume that if people are claiming that there was some sort of a cult that had arisen and or that George was involved with it, and that was the reason why that he brought up all of this into that home, wouldn't that have been caused at his prior residence before Amityville? And does Danny understand that, or was that ever brought up to Danny?
Well, in the film itself, actually, Danny cites an incident which I think is probably the most extreme paranormal phenomena incident mentioned in the entire film. I think one that definitely it's a make or break moment for the audience, depending on whoever's watching, where Danny talks about witnessing George practicing telekinesis and actually moving an object with his mind, which he cites as a wrench at the time in a garage in the house before they moved, the house they were living in, George's house in Deer Park, before they moved to Amityville. And so this was an incident that he told to Laura DiDio, and it's in the film, that definitely threw me for a loop. My opinion is that do I believe that's possible? In terms of the way I look at it. Again, this is a 9-year-old's perspective. on what was going on. And again, what I was trying to illustrate, and my suspicion with this entire situation, was the natural father was removed from the family, ripped away from the family, had left the family at a very, Danny was, still very young, all those children were very young, and was replaced with, an ex-Marine, a very, domineering personality. And again, I did not know George Lutz personally, so it's not my intention to sit here and blame George or try to put him down, especially since he's now deceased, not here to defend himself. However, everyone that I've talked to, I have met, many friends of George, have said a lot of very nice things about him, but even those people have told me that, George was one of those people that, if you crossed him in the wrong way, he definitely, would be, a very intense person, and somebody who, Laura DiDio had said this to me too, she actually, her feeling was that his involvement, being in the house himself, maybe not with the occult, but just his mere presence in the house served as a trigger for the haunting, which I found very interesting, which is something that's kind of exclusive to my Amityville Horror, because she hadn't talked about that anytime. It seems interesting now that George has passed away, everyone's talking a little bit more about what they truly felt about him. So that was kind of where I think that was coming from.
And I think Lorraine Warren also had similar comments, I guess, in her interaction when she was there at the house in the 70s. Now, there's one scene, it shocked me. There's one scene when Danny and Laura DiDio, who's the original news reporter intern that was trusted by the Lutz family back in the 70s, when Laura and Danny go back to the Amityville house, you were actually filming it, and it seemed as though he was very stone-faced. He was no reaction. It was as if he was just walking down the street in front of his own home, in Queens, and there was no trepidation. There was none of that. There was no feelings or anything like that came forward. Did that come to a shock to you?
No. Actually, knowing Danny myself, I would say no, and I'm doing that laughing. But I think again, he told me that he would have no problem going back in the house, and that leads me to another thought that I really think, while the house had something to do with it, I think that Danny's perception of it was that it had much more to do with them in the house than it did the actual house itself, which leads me to, comment upon like the DeFeos talking about, whether the DeFeo murders had anything to do with the haunting. Danny didn't. I don't want to speak for him, so I'm not going to put words in his mouth. But my interpretation of that, of what I got sense from him, was that he didn't feel so strongly that was the major cause. It was, again, his stepfather had triggered it, and this was the reason. And again, while that's very hard to swallow and very difficult for you or I to decide whether we believe or not, the story is, strayed far and wide from what its original basis was. From the very beginning, it was that way. It kind of got off on the wrong foot at the very, very beginning, and that was, I would say, to blame on George and Kathy Lutz. Their choices having left the house and who they involved in the investigation, who they trusted, that goes into a whole other direction. I could talk for 8 hours about that. But essentially, their choices to have a book written, the Amityville Horror by Jay Anson, and have the real children's names used in the book, you're forever scarring your family. With something that, we're living in a different time now. If you pulled something like that now, you probably would have your own reality show about the paranormal or something. But this was in, the mid-late 70s when this book was written in 1977. And, when this book came out, it was a sensation. And it's led to, numerous, motion pictures that have all been subpar, especially the latest remake was, in my opinion, was an abomination to cinema itself.
Yeah, I agree.
But, that's why I really was trying to do something that had a human quality to it and told a real story, because the person that I met, I wanted that person, as angry as he was and as confused I felt that he was about this incident and trying to rationalize it, I wanted to translate that onto film and make, and for better or for worse, or for because again, it was his choice to come forward, but I wanted to accurately capture that because it was riveting, having talked to him. And trying, I really wanted that real character. So at its heart, the film is a character study. But it serves a lot of different purposes. It talks about the Amityville horror. You could watch it and learn another angle of the story. You could, be interested in psychology and watch it from the human psychological perspective. It has many different angles, and I think that's why it works so well. I think there's definitely a lot of things about it that I look now, and I'm a perfectionist, so I'm always waiting. I always want more and want to change things, but sometimes you just have to stop. I'd probably still be here working on it. But the point is I'm very happy with its current form. I would have loved to have interviewed his brother, which I got very close to doing at the time. He chose, there's a little bit of I would say, a strife between the two boys. Just it's more personal towards them. Danny is removed from the entire family. They live in another state, and Danny lives in New York, and so he, hasn't really connected with them, to my knowing, in a long time. So this was kind of, this was Danny's choice. It was, and he definitely was very, upfront with me about not involving them in terms of not wanting to, he was making the choice to come forward, so it's not, his place to get them involved in his accounting of the event. So I think there was a little bit of respect there for them too, because the film doesn't go into really their account at all. So it's not our place. So it was a difficult, it's difficult for me because you want to do that. However, we weren't able to talk with them, unfortunately. So it's very much a character study, as I said, on Daniel Lutz and his, interpretation and his memories of that event and how this is manifested in his life since.
Okay, so talking about his memories, it seems to me that if the Amityville story were a hoax and all of this was made up, there would be some mistakes made or story trip-ups, or at least that Danny and his brother could have done, let alone George and Kathy. But I don't believe there are any. Do you know of any inconsistencies that Danny may have said that led you to believe that some parts of the story are not true and have been changed somewhat?
No, I wouldn't say there were any inconsistencies with anything the Lutzes talked about to what he talks about, other than the visitation by the priest, Father Ray, in the beginning. This may be attributed to more just his memory, again, of the event. So I'm not going to say that, I'm not saying that he's lying. However, I do think that the stories are slightly different here. His version of the story sounds a little bit more like the original movie version. I'll explain. Father Ralph Pecoraro, who was a friend of the family, someone who George knew, and the family had grown to be friends with, was asked to come in and do a house blessing on the very day they moved in. So on moving day, Father Ray shows up, begins performing a house blessing, and during that he famously has claimed that he heard a voice command him to get out, in an upstairs bedroom, and that he felt a disembodied hand slap him while he was doing this house blessing. And so that he said that he calmly went downstairs, and that George and Kathy had talked to him, and they had offered him to come back for dinner. He said he would, and he left. And that was, the way that George and Kathy had always talked about it numerous times. Danny's version of it, he talked about seeing, he was moving boxes out of the truck, and that he saw Father Ray coming into the house, and of course he wasn't present for when the alleged events happened to the priest, but he claimed that he saw Father Ray running out the door and to the car, like he was running, like trying to get away from the house type of situation. This is something that Danny talked about, which I found interesting. And then he went upstairs to the upstairs bedroom immediately following that incident, and there were 400, 500 flies in this upstairs bedroom. And so, this sounds like, to me at least, it sounds like a movie version. If anybody's seen the original Amityville horror film, the 1979 version, with James Brolin, Rod Steiger plays a priest who goes up into this bedroom, does a house, is performing a house blessing when he's attacked by hordes of flies and then runs away from the house, vomiting and all of this other stuff. Mm-hmm. So right. while Danny didn't claim those things directly, his story seems to sound more like a movie version than it did what George and Kathy Lutz talked about. But primarily, without nitpicking little things like that, I think that my suspicion is that it has much more to do with, a child who's gone through a lifetime of seeing this media snowball build and build and build, and being able to differentiate, those details from what you actually remember. Some of that has to leak into your account. Some of that has to skew your perspective. And that's why I found this actually quite fascinating. And I keep saying it's kind of larger than the Amityville story or transcends it, because it does talk about how does someone rationalize this? How does someone talk about these incidents without being at a young age like that, and it not affecting your judgment or your memory of the event? So I thought it was very interesting from that perspective. But in terms of their consistencies, no, I really don't think that there anything that Danny says that other than that incident that misconstrued or that contradicts anything George and Kathy talked about. The Lutzes themselves had talked. I found it interesting that Kathy had mentioned that the front door of the house had blown out of the house. The front solid wood front door had blown out of the house. Mm-hmm. And there was no evidence of. They claimed, I think, that handymen had come and repaired it. But from the research that I've done and the people I've talked to, no one has ever, the people have never come forward to say that, no one was ever there to fix anything. And, right. I don't know. It just seems to be an extreme claim to say that the front door of the house blew out, of the house. Like there was some kind of force from within that blew it out. I don't know. There's a lot of the extreme claims of levitation and these other ones I personally myself find hard to swallow. I'm not going to say that I think they're lying, but that's what's actually quite chilling and I think frightening for me about someone who goes through a haunting, listening to them, trying to convince you of these things that they feel absolutely happened to them. So, what is the answer to that? I don't think anybody has the answer to that. And that, I think, is what the power behind it is, and why I mentioned before that I think, my film really represents that blurring of the line between reality and the imagination, and again, the memory of the event and what that's done to a person. So I think it's I don't think it's so literal or so black and white as many people may think that it is. There's many emotional gray areas and levels with this film that I think that maybe many people who are genre or horror film fans and stuff may not be expecting. But it's the truth of what. As Amityville horror stands for the Lutzes today, or Daniel Lutz in particular, this is the current state of what it is, and it's quite tragic in my opinion.
Why do you think that the Amityville story has captured the world like it has for so long?
Well, I think, having all under one roof, you have a mass murder that, Ronnie DeFeo Jr., who was 23 at the time, was convicted of all 6 murders. There were 9 rifle shots fired that night, none of which any of the neighbors claimed to hear at the time, other than, a boy 2 doors down from the house had heard the, DeFeo's sheepdog barking. Other than that, no one had claimed to hear anything. How do you explain that? All these questions that, all this mystique and myth and folklore that had built up around that house just in the year since that had happened. I mean, this was Amityville's an affluent community. And so for this to have happened in this place at the time, this sent huge shockwaves through this community and the surrounding area, and it was, nationwide news at the time. So it was a huge story. So to have a family, move into this house and then leave after 28 days claiming that the house was possessed and that they had, experienced a violent, what they felt at the time was a demonic haunting, of course, in my opinion, if that would happen to me and I believed that, I probably wouldn't be telling anybody. I would be trying to seek help from someone, which, from my understanding, George Lutz was trying to do, which is why he consulted people like Lord Dio. At the time, the first person they called, which brought a lot of suspicion onto the Lutzes, was William Weber, who was Ronnie DeFeo's defense attorney for his trial. And so it's like, why are George and Kathy Lutz consulting with Weber, about, their alleged paranormal incident? At the time, Weber was writing a book about the DeFeo trial, about the DeFeo murders, and he wanted to use George and Kathy Lutz's account as part of his book at the end of the book. So he definitely had a motive in terms of trying to create a story and create essentially a good ghost story to end his book,
right,
about this house. And so it was their dealings with that, and Laura DiDio herself has told me she heard tapes where, and the Lutzes had admitted to her at the time, where George and Kathy had sat with William Weber and had talked openly about what we would do if we created the houses and like how we could elaborate on our claims of a haunting, things like green slime and, all this type of stuff that Weber has since come out and talked about that, he had with them, which Laura has backed up and told me. And my opinion is that's why it involved her as as the main interviewer in the film with Danny Lutz. I really value her friendship and her objective viewpoint. I think she definitely is the most trustworthy, objective viewpoint within this whole story out of the parade of characters of original people who were there at the time. She was very young, essentially she was kind of doing what I was doing, what I'm doing now, essentially back then. But
right.
Not the same ways. She was, in a lot of ways, she was doing, she was a news assistant for Channel 5 News in New York. And so at the time she was, I'm showing the story here, she was with Channel 5, and she was Marvin Scott. Had always had this story, and they had gone and they had done the investigation March 6, 1976, and where she invited the Warrens to go into the property, as well as various members of Duke University, were there. There were just a whole combination of people who were there at the time with varying opinions about what the haunting could be. So, this kind of hoopla got started at the very beginning, which I really think lends itself, to why the story has the legs it has today, because you've had every type of phenomena, claimed about this house. There's been claims that this house was built on an Indian burial ground. This was, the story or the theory that was proposed by Dr. Hans Holzer at the time when he went into the house in 1977 after the Lutzes had fled with a deep trance medium who was named Ethel Johnson Myers. Laura DiDio was present for that as well, and she said that, this woman developed what she said was, almost like a manly, like an Adam's apple, and then she went under the deep trance and almost changed, almost facial form in many ways, in many respects. And so at the time, she was speaking with what she felt was an Indian chief buried on that property. And that he was, basically on a warpath, that this, whoever was living on this property was going to be, affected until they moved off, until the house was either torn down or they moved off the property. So it's, it sounds like typical horror movie stuff, but this stuff continues to be talked about. And for me, I just go back to what was originally said. There's no denying the tragedy that the DeFeo murders, and I would attribute, again, as I mentioned, any kind of haunting that I believe happened there, and I do believe something of an unexplained nature happened to the Lutz family. I do believe that. I don't believe anybody leaves everything they have inside a house, all of their furniture, everything, their entire investment wrapped up into this home and flees across the country, leaving that, it just doesn't make sense at the time. There was the cards definitely were not in their favor in trying to formulate a hoax, and I don't believe that was the case. But after the fact, after this story had become synonymous in the media and, that first year of leaving, it became a big story. So I think that I'm not denying. I think that once they got to California, once they started talking, negotiating with Jay Anson, obviously, it was probably an attractive item to sell their story rights for a book, So, or to have a book written about their story. So I can imagine that, after going through something like that, it's just, my opinion is, why did they, or my question has always been, why did they allow Jay Anson to insert so much fiction into this account if, what they were trying to do was tell the truth of the matter, which is actually quite suspect in and of itself. Mm-hmm. So there's so much, I think there's blood on everyone's hands in terms of the story. And that's actually what's quite fascinating about it. Again, the personalities that are involved in it.
How does Danny feel now that the film has been shown and it's been on the circuit? Is he happy with the way that the film turned out?
Yeah, I mean, like I said, I don't want to speak for him, but I know that he's very happy to have gotten this, off of his chest and to finally have, gone public with something that has been haunting him for so long. I mean, it's a difficult thing when you make a film about someone else and you have a film made about you, essentially, and, especially with a sensitive topic like this. I've, have had an enormous respect for him coming forward publicly like this, and I also thought, respect for him not only doing that, but, he could have certainly have gone to, I'm an independent filmmaker. Could have gone to a Hollywood production company or something, and, another horror film would have been made. But he chose to do it with someone who knew the story inside and out and was, obviously passionate about it, but also, that was going to be able, it was a little bit more of an inside, we were able to do this and have like a more of a family, production in the sense that we were trying to be, it's a very sensitive thing, trying not to create any fiction in the sense, really trying to capture reality, and that was my job.
Right, you didn't alter the reality of it.
No, not at all, and that's what's the difficulty of it. And I think Danny definitely got to a point, especially after we were shooting with Lorraine Warren, where he was just done. He was just done talking about it completely. And as a filmmaker, you want to continue to move forward and continue to get more out of it. When someone is just finished, you can only press so much. And so that was actually probably the most infuriating thing for me. But I'm extraordinarily happy having gotten, and actually still to this day quite shocked with how much I did get, because we got quite a bit of stuff that I'm, I think there was definitely a reason that this hasn't been done before now.
Well, obviously now, since both Kathy and George have both passed away, and the three kids are really the only ones remaining that can continue to tell the story, do you think that there'll ever be a point when the truth comes out? And if so, what would you consider to be the truth of what went on in that house?
Well, I think, like I touched upon it before, like I really don't, I truly believe that the truth is essentially unattainable in this case now. I mean, it really depends on what the truth would be to you or to anybody asking that question, because for me, the only way to prove to me that this happened would be take me back there and show me. Because otherwise you could talk all day long about this, but I'm not going to believe that it absolutely happened, and the only evidence that I have to present is this person, is this emotional effect left on it, on this person. And so this is, that really is the evidence that we have. I mean, again, as I've mentioned, it's the film is about the blurring of the line between reality and imagination, and I think that's what Daniel's account represents, and he in and of himself represents now. And so that's the tragedy of it. But it's kind of it's a difficult question about the truth of it, because they're definitely, what I think that Peter Jordan, who is a parapsychologist who actually investigated this case after the fact, after the Lutzes left the house, and he was more looking into, trying to verify the claims in Anson's book, which I always found kind of hilarious, because the book was, I guess at the time it made sense because it hadn't necessarily been debunked at that time, but since, people use the book as some sort of record to prove that this, this didn't happen. Well, no, it didn't, because that's total fiction, despite the fact that it says a true story in the front cover. It's total fiction. But Peter Jordan had talked about, he says it in the film that, what should have happened was that, a group of investigators should have interviewed the family individually, had gone to the property immediately following this happening, keep the press completely out of the picture, and for me, I think that that's what my Amityville horror represents a lot, in many ways, is, this story has been drugged through the media for so many years that the truth has been lost in the mountains of myth that surround it. The circus parade of all of the conspiracy theory people and all of the, ghost hunters, and, I'm not talking down about anybody, but all of the people, in the media, this type of thing, that have everything to say about the Amityville story, but no one's ever been there. No one's ever talked to the family. No one's, it's become kind of the American staple of a haunting, but it's, it's unfortunate because of the way it got, how it got that way. It's because, this book was written, it was certainly a sensational story, but it essentially has been drugged through the mud by Hollywood, and it's just an interesting, now, it's that those effects have manifested into the child and to the people that remain, and that's what I think, my film, my Amityville horror, represents. And it's, it's definitely a sad picture, and I think that's what I was after, and that's what I discovered. And so if there's any truth really remaining, to this story, I think that for me, I can't walk away from that saying that nothing happened there, that this was all made up. I don't believe that. I believe that something absolutely happened. I can't prove it, but it definitely is my instinct that something absolutely happened to this family of a genuine, unexplained nature. Was it to the level that they say it was? My suspicion is probably not, but I can't prove that either. So it's up in the air, and it definitely will be, the topic of discussion probably for another 35 years.
Well, your bio says that you like to investigate and research about unsolved mysteries that seem to have been perplexed the public for many years. Will you be looking to do another film similar to the Amityville case, maybe sort of some other paranormal phenomenon case?
Absolutely. I'm working on several things pretty quite feverishly at the moment, actually. I'm working on a narrative myself right now, as well as another documentary. I'm both in talks with several different companies right now about those things, so we're literally right in the heat of it right now. So I'm definitely looking to explore as many things that I've learned through this project, and I would say that I'm definitely looking, especially if I do another documentary, which I hope to, explore different aspects of, a phenomena. I'm also interested in the topic of UFOs and also, psychics and true crime and this type, other phenomena, paranormal phenomena, as I mentioned. But whatever the topic is, I really want to approach it in the same manner, in the sense of being objective and not trying to go in with an agenda. Because there's nothing that for me personally, that infuriates me more than to see these, documentaries, quote unquote. I see a lot of these that are more like, they're just entertainment. They're created, and so you lose the truth of what it is. So trying to retain the truth of the matter, and when it's so difficult to do with the Amityville case, because a lot of people think this whole thing is a sham and it was all made up. For me, going into that, trying to do, you have to. I would definitely approach that because I don't want to add to the, obviously the film's going to add to the legend, but I don't want to continue to add to all of the myth that's been out there about this. So I think that this film definitely, for the first time, has actually tried to honestly present, the case in a true to form, in the raw, essentially.
Absolutely.
And I really tried to connect with people with that. So it's, I'm very proud of what it is and how it stands today.
What would you like the viewers of the film to take away from it?
I think that, this speaks to the reality of the paranormal for people who have gone through it. Whether or not you believe in the paranormal is up to you, but I think that it's really, I think that anybody from any viewpoint will get something out of this. It's not something that that is going to be, I'm trying to convince you that the house, or Danny's even trying to convince you that this happened. I think that he definitely would say himself too that, he doesn't care whether you believe it or not, but, you can tell from watching him that he believes it, that he absolutely believes this happened. I don't think there's any question in that. And so, I again, walking away from it, I think the audience will be left with, well, if this didn't happen, what happened to this person? So, at the end of the day, I think that's what we're left with, is that this something absolutely happened to this family. And, the mystery still remains, of course, but the mystery in and of itself has created almost, this tragic picture and these psychological traumatic scars on this person's life. And I suspect probably in many ways, maybe not in similar ways, but on the other children as well. Maybe
right.
just in different ways. I mean, it appears that they've all dealt with it differently.
When and how can our listeners see the film?
Well, right now it's actually going to be available, like I mentioned, on August 6th of this year. It's going to be just in a month or two or now. From August 6th, 2013, from IFC Films. The film will be available all over the place. Amazon. You can check our website out at amityvillemovie.com. You can find us on Facebook at My Amityville Horror. And we'll have information about, when that's coming out. So it's August 6th is when the DVD comes out, and it'll also, again, on August 6th, it'll be available on VOD, iTunes, Amazon Instant Play, PS3, Xbox, basically all of the, VOD market providers. So it will be back available there. So, but like I mentioned, there will be a lot of interesting, I think, additions to this DVD that will give people a little bit of an insight into not only the production of the film, but also how this how this film came to be in terms of how I met Danny and made that connection. So I think it's quite interesting and kind of lifting the veil on the film as well.
Right.
So I'm trying to be as transparent as possible, if that makes any sense. And I think that's what this case needed.
Absolutely, it did. Yes, and you hit it. You completely hit it out of the park with this film. It truly is and I keep saying the word powerful and intense, but it really is. And you did not alter any of the reality of the story itself. I mean, it literally was just sitting a camera down on a table and just letting Daniel talk. It just. I was so engaged in the movie, and I've been promoting it all over the place. I've been telling people about it, and I just thank you for putting this film out. I think it really needed to be done, and like you were saying before, all these horrible movies and documentaries that have been put out, it's finally a refreshing, a breath of fresh air to actually have a documentary and a film like yours out there that will soon be able to be viewed on DVD August 6th. So that you can get a true, I guess, the inner sense of what really, or what people may say, what may not have happened, or what may have happened in that house to the Lutz family. And so, I thank you for putting this film out.
Well, thank you very much. I greatly appreciate those comments, and I hope that everyone is also able to pull away, the same kind of effect. I think as you were asking the question, and everyone's going to take something different away from this. And I think it really is based on your belief in the paranormal or belief in, the veracity of Daniel Lutz. There'll be some people that absolutely will never, ever believe anything he says, and then some people will believe everything he says. But,
right.
For me, I think I'm somewhere in the middle. I think that having known Danny, that I'm not sure that he knows all the answers to even a lot of the questions that are proposed in the film. So it's a difficult gray area, but I appreciate those comments.
It definitely affected me when I watched it. I mean, really, all I could say after I finished was, wow. I mean, it really did. And the film is called My Amityville Horror, and everyone can check out Eric's website, which is ericwalterfilm.com, and the Facebook page. We'll post the link in the chat room. And, Eric, we want to thank you for coming on our show tonight, and we wish you the best of luck with this amazing film and your future work.
Thank you so much. I would love to come back on once I have something else happening.
Definitely.
Oh, we can't wait. We can't wait, Eric.
All right. Great.
Thank you so much,
well,
Eric.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Eric.
Right.
Good night.
Have a great weekend. Good night.
You too. Bye-bye.
Amazing. I know we keep always saying that word amazing all the time. Are you there?
It's true. I mean, this was something. After I saw it, I told you it was like, all I could say was wow. I mean, watching this film and watching Daniel speak to the camera got to me. Something definitely happened to this man. And I saw pain. I saw scars. Just the feeling that I got from this person, it was just, we keep using the word powerful, but it is truly powerful.
You know, when we were thinking about doing something about Amityville, you know, a lot of people were asking us, have you ever done a show on the Amityville horror? Did you ever talk to anybody, or will you ever do a show on Amityville? So we started to talk about this a while back, and you know, a lot of the documentaries that we've seen on the History Channel, and you know, this all goes back to even on Unsolved Mysteries, and I even think I even saw an episode on In Search Of on George and Kathy, and I've seen so many YouTube clips of them being on talk shows, and you know, I get the story. I can get the story from all of these clips, and I can get the story from the articles that have been written. Some have been tainted with the word hoax on it, or you know, they put the big question mark over the entire Amityville story itself, amongst the house, amongst the people, everything, the investigators and the parapsychologists and the reporters, all of that stuff. There's always a question mark, and there's always been a question mark around it. And so when we were talking about doing something about Amityville, I can't, you know, honestly, right now, Lucy, I can't even remember how, do you remember how we even came across Eric's film?
No, I don't. Oh my God.
It's very strange right now because I cannot remember how we came across it. But when I, you know, clicked, you know, when I got on to actually being able to view the film, I said, okay, all right, another documentary on Amityville House. And right off the bat, the first 5 minutes of this film grabbed a hold of me. And Eric had mentioned it when we were talking to him, that it was the dead-on, straight shot of Daniel Lutz talking to the camera, directly to the camera. His eyes are looking at you, and he has this, I think it's a 2 or 3 minute intro where he brings you into his life, his world, and you don't want to get out because you want to find out more, and you want to find out what happened. But all along, I don't know, I kind of felt sorry for him. I kind of felt, you know, sort of sympathy in a way that, not because of what he had gone through, but, and I think he expressed this in the film, that he wished, I think it was maybe Laura, the news reporter back in the 70s that was there, she was on the film again here, and I think he said to her, I wish somebody would have just asked me. You know, I wanted somebody to ask me what happened, but nobody ever did. And just the feeling, I mean, if you can picture it, being a child, having something as horrible as what Danny has talked about and what the Lutzes have talked about happen to you in your house for 28 days and not be able to talk about it, or to even say something and people dismiss you for 35 years. That, first of all, has to disturb you mentally, number one. It has to strip you away of the trust issues that you have. So in seeing the film, I understood why he was so intense, why he was so angry, why he was so distrusting of the psychologists that had talked to him. And I mean, that in itself, I think it's the first 10 minutes of, or maybe it's after 8 minutes into the film, he sits down with a psychologist, and he does something that is very intense to these psychologists, but it's very understandable as to why. And it's because he has lost trust in everyone in life. And so it plays with your head. And to Eric's point, I think it probably could have warped some of the memories, but I think, and this is my opinion, I truly think that what Danny has said and what he's proclaimed in this film and elsewhere has happened. Now, little specific details, okay, maybe they were either exaggerated a little bit or changed a little bit, but I think the meat of the story, the whole thing that he's talking about, and even one of the stories where he was shot up his stairwell area, not down, he was shot up 2 flights. That, I believe, happened. Now, what he was wearing or how he landed on the landing when it happened, that could be sort of, a little bit of a haze. But I think the meat of what had happened to him, I think, is real. And you get that sense from him when he talks about it because you can feel, like you were just saying, you can feel his pain. You can you can actually envision what he's talking about. And for Eric to put this on film, to me, it was amazing. I mean, honestly, not to put Eric down, but, he just put a camera in front of Danny, and Danny did all the work. Right. But to be able to capture that and to put it in a story and to lay it out the way that he did, again, he didn't alter anything. Eric did not alter this film or words or anything. Personally, I think Danny would have probably beat the crap out of him if he did. But I think just him doing this and Danny agreeing to get the story out, I'm hoping that somehow the story about it or the bad-mouthing that has been going on, lack of a better word, I can't think of anything else, but bad-mouthing that has been going around about the Lutz's family, about them themselves for so long, maybe there'll be some validity to things. Maybe it'll set out. Who knows? It could probably set off another firestorm, as, we've seen a lot of times in the paranormal community where, there's the skeptics and the doubts and the name-calling and whatever. But I'm hoping that this, if anything else, this brings a peace to Danny, and it brings some normalcy back into his life after almost 40 years. Well, he's 47. So, after 40 years, 38 years of living with this, that somehow he can be at peace with himself and his children, and so that he can continue and live the rest of his life maybe in happiness, in peacefulness, somehow. I can't say enough about this film, and actually I can't wait till it comes out on DVD because I do want to get the DVD on this. And one of the things, I'm sorry, Lucy, I know I'm rambling on, but one of the things that really shocked me personally is probably not going to shock anybody else, but what shocked me personally about this film was there was a shot of a street sign and of the neighborhood of Danny, and I've come to find that Danny Lutz lives about maybe 3 blocks away from me. So that was pretty shocking itself to know that. And now my eyes are going to be peering when I walk the neighborhood or, go to the corner store now. I probably have bumped into him somewhere, but never realized it. So that was pretty amazing for myself.
Well, I remember I told you as soon as I saw that it was Whitestone, I was like, oh my God, he's right there with you. He's right there in the same
You
house.
told me that afterwards, but there was a shot of Clintonville, the street sign, which is 2 blocks away from me. And I believe he's about 3 blocks away from me somewhere in Whitestone, Queens. So it was pretty shocking for me.
Well, I was looking at the garage, and there's a shot where he comes in, and there's a trailer home, and I'm trying to think, okay, did I see any of this? Did any of this look familiar? I was like, okay, wait a minute. Did I see the street? Did I see that wall? I'm like going through all of this. But you know what? Getting back to what you were saying about Danny and his pain. Watching this movie, okay, and I told Eric this, and I told you this, and I'm going to say it again. I cried watching this movie because the obvious pain and that this guy is going through, one of the things I noticed in doing the research and looking at different websites and looking up, there are two definite camps on Amityville. There are the people that definitely don't believe, and they say, oh, this is all a hoax. They were doing it for money, and Danny's doing it for money. Why is he talking about it? And then there's the other camp that believes. And I'm kind of like in the film coming from Danny himself, because I had never seen the original film, and I watched it, and to me that was absolute garbage. I mean, I've seen people say, oh, it was absolutely great. No, it was garbage. It was garbage. A lot of the other stuff that I've seen on this is garbage. But reading through all of the things that I found, the transcripts and all of this and the news stories, and then watching Danny tell his story, we may not know the actual truth of what really happened in this home, but I do definitely believe that something did happen to this guy. Something happened to him when he was a child. And the burden of carrying that his whole life has scarred him. I mean, think about it. You know in your own mind, and we've talked about this before, your own truth is your own truth. There's something that you truly believe. And here's somebody who knows that something has happened to him. In his own mind, whether it is an accurate remembrance or not, something has happened. But yet you've got the rest of the world, or you've got a part of the world that keeps saying, oh, no, this never happened. Oh, there's ulterior motives. Oh, he's about the money. I honestly don't think he's doing this for money. I think it's a way of unloading this burden that's been on him, this whatever memory he has. It's a way of getting rid of it. It's time to let go. I mean, you carry something traumatic with you for such a long time, it's going to change you. It's definitely going to change you. And I know there's going to be people that still are going to claim that it wasn't real and that it was a hoax. Well, yeah, like Eric mentioned, I mean, I think the Lutzes did make mistakes, but they allowed Anson to add, some sensationalism, change the story a little bit. But think about it. You've got a family that has left every single thing they own in a house. They've moved across the country. How the heck do you start over? You're going to need some money. So think about it from that point of view. At the time, to George and Kathy, it may have been a way for them to make money and to start over again. Sure, the story's in there, and there's some extra stuff put in, but I'm taking it from the point of a parent, and you want to provide for your kids and you have to start over. They left everything they owned in that house. Now, there's the others, I've been reading the chat room, there's people that are saying, why hasn't anything happened in the house since the Lutzes? Well, I'm beginning to believe that this really did center around the family themselves, that it's not necessarily the house. We hear all the theories, the burial ground, of course, blame it on the Indians again. We get blamed for everything. But there are so many things that do kind of click. Excuse me. So I think the bottom line with watching this film is that you actually get into Danny's world for a brief time. For the 80 minutes that you're watching this film, you are actually in Danny's world. And you know something? From what I saw of that film, it was not a pleasant one. And I hope that by speaking out about it, that, like you said, I hope Danny does find some peace with this.
One of the additional reasons that I heard Danny say, the reason why he is coming out now to tell his story was for his children, that his children don't even know the whole story. He didn't even confide and tell his children the story of what had happened to him and his family at that home. And so his kids were asking him questions as they were growing up, because obviously they've seen the films, the documentaries. Obviously they know that their father was the child in that home. And they would ask him questions, and he I don't know if it was as a form of protection for them, or if he hadn't come to grips with the reality of what had happened, and to actually say that out loud to someone else is sort of validating it. And he may not have been ready to validate it at that point. Mm-hmm. And so his kids are older now, and so he wants to be able to get his story out there, put it on film, put it on record, so that his kids now understand what had happened to him. Now, I don't know if he told personally the same exact things that he said in the film to his children, or maybe this was his way of telling his kids what had happened and just had them watch it, and maybe they talked about it after. But that was, I know, one of the main reasons why he said he wanted to come forward was because of his kids and to get them to understand it. But I also think it had to do with some sort of normalcy for himself. He wanted to get over it. He wanted to put this behind him. As much as he's been saying all this time that he's put it behind him, he's put it away, he's shunned away that character that people claim him to be, it's still in him. It still lives and lingers amongst him. Now, I just want to play, we have a 4-minute clip of the movie that I wanted to play for everybody, and it is Danny talking about the incident that happened in his home, and I think this may have been early on. They were only in there for 28 days, but I think this was early on in those 28 days of the incident that happened upstairs on the second floor in the, I think it was the playroom, and I think it's the same room where Eric was talking about the flies around the window. And Danny talks about opening up a window and an incident happening, and then being in the kitchen and the entire family seeing an apparition and what the apparition did in the kitchen to them. So I just wanted to play this because you can get the intensity of what Lucy and I have been talking about, and you sort of get a little bit of a sense of what this movie plays and how it plays out and the feeling that Danny gives off to you. I think this is really powerful.
What you really need to listen to his voice. If anything, listen to his voice.
All right, so I'm going to play this right now. It's about 3 minutes and 55 seconds, so take a listen.
It started out as an incredible, foul, dumpster juice type of smell, stench. We started going around opening all the windows and the doors, all over the house. I had got up to the playroom, the room with the flies, was trying to open a jammed window. And I get it open, and I felt like Superman. I was like, wow, that was like one of the strongest things I ever did. I got the window open. And my brother entered the room. Hey, you got it? And I turned around to look at it. Yeah, I got it. And the window came slamming down, and it crushed my fingers to the point that it was skin on skin. Left hand and right hand. Shattered this section of this finger. This knuckle's never been the same, and I don't know if you can see that right there. That little hook in my pinky, one hand compared to the other. You see that? That's from the windowsill, like that, and when it smashed. And this was both hands. And it took George, my mother, my brother, whoever George's friend was there helping them move shit around to get the window off my fingers. And my mom starts fishing for ice, and she wants to make phone calls and get ice and do all of these things. In her turning around to get a rag to put the ice cubes in, to put in my hand as we're sitting in the kitchen, the side door opened. Very slowly, and we both stopped what we were doing to pay attention, and there was nobody there. Wow, I hate doing this. I fucking hate doing this. Why are you making me do this, dude? I just got to spit this out, all right? A fucking spirit comes into the house, into the room, through the door, bumps into my mother, walks through my hands, like this, that are hanging off the table, knocks the peanut butter and jelly knife down onto the floor, and sits down in this spot here.
Did you hear a humming, a buzzing? What kind of noise?
No.
So it just sat there, or something made an impression on the seat?
Yes.
What did you guys do?
We still.
Most people would be out of the house
yes,
by this point.
Mom, can I have the ice? You know, and
what happened specifically?
We're doing this, and she's wrapping my hands, and in that 3 seconds it took to look back, it was gone.
Where was
So
George at this
he
point?
was upstairs trying to figure out what happened to the window. Why is it stuck? So as I'm sitting there, and my mother flips over my hands, and she's looking back, and this is like, wow, because we're talking skin on skin here, and my hands swell up to the size of a child's baseball glove. 5 times their normal size.
Now, did they take you to the doctor?
And in 1 second, my hand went back to normal, except for this pinky.
So that pinky, let's see, it's still...
That's permanent from...
It's still bent. Did they take you to the doctor?
No.
I get chills just listening to that again.
I know.
It does get raw. He does have a potty mouth. He's speaking out of frustration. He's revealing something that is very personal to him to perfect strangers. And, you can tell the anger is coming from the point of, in his mind, and this is what I'm thinking, the anger that he's giving off in his speech and in his talk throughout the documentary, the anger is the voices in his head telling him, okay, I'm going to say this, I'm going to tell my story, and they're going to say I'm all full of bullshit, and that I'm a liar, and everything else. I can hear it. I can hear that that's what is going through his mind, and to me, that is not someone who's making up a story. To me, that's not someone who has scripted or put together. That's raw, real emotion. That is not something that you can learn in acting school. That is not something that even the best actor can portray. I mean, this is my opinion. People are going to most definitely disagree with me, and that's fine. But to me, his story, the way that he tells it, and yeah, he is a little bit dramatic, but again, I think that's because the emotions are just pouring out like as if you were pouring water out of a pitcher. It is just coming out because this is really the first time that he's ever said this in public, knowing that millions of people will be listening. He may have told it to close friends or family or girlfriends or wives, whoever, but he's never told it in a position where he knows now that millions of people are going to know and listen to what he just said. And so the idea of that in his mind as he's telling it, it's the frustration that even though I'm going to say this, people are still going to hate me, or still going to call me names, or still defame me, or call it a hoax. And he's trying to get you to understand what is in his mind. And the only way to do it is for him to be raw and real.
Well, you know what I took from it was partially that, but what I'm feeling from him is the fact that he mentioned it in the film. He says, once I start talking about it, I'm right there. I'm right in it again. That, I think, is where some of that anger is coming from. It's the fact that he can't shake these memories. He can't shake the thought of what happened to him. Every time he talks about it, it starts all over for him. It's kind of like what was that movie, Groundhog Day? It just keeps going over and over. So here's this replay of whatever he's remembering, and it's happening to him every single day of his life. He's 47 years old. This is 42 years of remembering and reliving what obviously was something that no one else is going to understand that unless you were there. I think that's where a lot of the anger comes from.
But, we have a caller. I'm going to pick up the line in a minute. But, when there's always the difference when you speak about something that has happened to you that is personal. There's a difference between that and the difference between having that memory in your mind. Even I've seen it millions of times when there's a death in the family, okay, and you see that person within the first 24 or 48 hours, and their mother died or their close relative or close friend, somebody that was very dear to them. You see them and they look semi-normal. They seem to be, in your mind, handling it, quote unquote, handling it very well.
Mm-hmm.
But the point when that person then says to you, I miss, Jane Doe, I miss John Doe, I miss whatever it is, or they start talking about that person, they're verbally conveying it. That's when the reality of the experience, the incident, the traumatic whatever, the validity of that hits them, and then that's when the emotions start to come, because it's always been in the head, it's always been in the mind, but it's not until somebody verbally says it, that's when all of the emotions come out, because you are validating it at that point. It's sort of being recorded, because you are putting it out there. You are breathing that communication out to someone else, that now you are validating that actually has happened, and now you've come to the reality of it, and there comes the emotions. There comes the feelings towards it, because now it's out. It's not being held in. It's not being put in a little box in the back of your brain. It's now out in the open on the table for everyone to see, and because of that, that's when the emotions come in. I think that's what's happening with Danny in the movie, and that's why you see him so angry and so intense, and even you see him regressing back to a child at some point, and then you see him being a quote unquote normal person, and then flipping back. It's a very compelling documentary and film, because again, I keep saying the word raw. It is raw. It is very raw. It is very real, to the point where it's as if you are there with him. And I give credit to Eric Walter for doing that, because that's what engages you in it. You're not the third party. You're the first person. You're in there with him. You're across the table, sitting from him, listening to him talk to you, and that, I think, is a good director. That, I think, is what Eric did very, very well.
Well, it's amazing for a first piece of work. I will say that. It's absolutely amazing. It really is.
All right, so do you want to take this call?
Yeah.
Okay, so area code 989, you are on the air with Anthony and Lucy.
Hi, guys, it's Noah.
How did I know it was Noah?
How you doing?
Good, what's going on?
Good, I've been enjoying the show. There's been so much going on in chat and with the show and with the documentary. I watched part of it, and you guys have said so many things, but I want to second a few things that you said. Out of all of the paranormal cases I've watched and heard, this is probably the most compelling. And like you guys said, he's not out to make money, because there isn't a fortune to be made. What I'm seeing is somebody who had a real encounter, who wants to be heard, and it comes out as anger, I think, because he knows that people are going to think he's a kook, that he's crazy. And I'm sure that everyone that is listening to this show feels that way. We don't want to share our experiences with other people because they automatically assume you're a nut job or what have you. When we see a spirit and we try to tell other people, they don't get it. But I really respect him for coming forward and giving a very honest account of what happened, despite what people say and think. Because I think once we put the truth out there, it's good for us. And like you guys alluded to, I think he's doing it for posterity, for his kids, so that they'll know, what their dad, what he went through. And it's a very serious, very visceral, hard, harsh situation.
Right. And
I've seen that with Vietnam vets that come back and have never said a single word of what goes on to their family. So it's the same thing. I really believe he's tried to protect his kids from that experience, and now that they're old enough, I think now is the time that he can come out and he can say, okay, here's what happened.
Right.
Absolutely. And for people that have maybe read some Hawthorne, early American author, he wrote a lot of dark stories. His kids had no idea that he wrote those stories, like Young Goodman Drown, about the devil, The Minister's Black Veil. They really, he did it secretively, and he was very lighthearted to his kids, but he had, a dark side and things he thought about. And once his kids read those stories, they were shocked it was their dad. But it really let them see the reality of the hypocrisy of Puritanism. And I kind of see this too with him. He's taking a leap of faith and just going out there and saying what happened. And I applaud him for that, because, if I told people that, one night in my house I got out of the shower and I actually saw a spirit pass by in my upstairs, they would think I was a nut. But I know what happened. And so I think that it's helpful for those of us that believe, too, to hear somebody else make a very bold stand and really give us every detail of everything, so that we know that, we're not crazy, too. It helps us, not just as kids, not just the public, but it helps those of us that believe and that are enthusiasts.
Another thing that sort of validates my opinion that he is for real and he's not doing this for an ulterior motive is he could easily be a media whore right now. He could be on every talk show. He could be on, every blog talk radio show. Lucy and I have tried to reach out. Lucy tried to reach out to him. But he's not out there. He is not out there at all. Eric is really the only one, and I think his executive producer are the only ones that have been on the circuit talking about and promoting the movie. He has not once come out yet. Now, if there was an ulterior motive for his actions for this movie, if there was a reason for him to do this other than for him to get this information out and to get his story out there, you would see him. You would see him all over the place, and he's not there. And so to me that validates that there is no ulterior motive. This movie has been out, I think, since March. It was on the circuit. There were some selective theaters across the country that were screening this, and now it's going to be out on DVD. If he was so concerned about money, I guarantee you would see him somewhere, and you don't.
Exactly, and they would make a new movie. In fact, on Netflix, there's a streaming movie. I don't know if you guys mentioned this. It's called Amityville something, and it's a very hokey B-class movie about people that move in after the original family did, and it basically is a slasher film, nudity, very, very bad in poor taste.
Oh, God. Yeah.
And so for him to come forward, again, it's brave because of so many things that have been said about it is in such poor taste, and also very negative. But I'm not going to take up any more airtime. Thank you guys for taking my call. Love
Thank you,
guys. Love your show. Always glad to be a participant.
Well, we love you too.
Noah.
Have a great week. Have a great weekend.
Bye-bye.
And you know, those movies that Noah was talking about, you know, the blood, boobs, and gore that people are portraying with the Amityville horror is now a reflection of him, of Danny, and of Christopher, and of Melissa, you know, the siblings that are involved in this. Now there's that portrayal on them that somehow they're related to the boobs, you know, blood and gore that people are putting out in these horrible B and C films, and to deal with that every single day, I could not imagine it. I could not imagine that.
No, not at all. Well, like I said, I didn't even like the original film that they made. I mean, watching it, I watched it after I watched the documentary, and I just thought, this is a bunch of crap. This is such, I mean, it was so sensationalized, and the whole thing, the word Amityville now is just surrounded by such garbage and
right.
such crap that it's hard to go back to the facts and to what really has happened and to get an objective view of what. And I think this film really does an excellent job of being objective. You don't get Eric's opinion. You get Danny. And you get Danny in with the psychologist, you get him with the reporters, you get him, you know, looking at these pictures. And what you're seeing, I mean, you literally are being taken into this person's world. And it hasn't been an easy one. That's what I'm getting.
And Eric does, just to be fair, Eric does give you different vantage points of the story. So, yes, he does have Danny in there, and it is Danny telling his story and his experience and everything that has happened to him and his feelings. But he also has experts, which we sort of alluded to during the interview. He has some parapsychologists there. You know, he does have Lorraine Warren there. There is the original news reporter. And then there is I believe it's another psychologist, I think her name is Elizabeth Loftus, who talks about the idea that memory is sort of a fuzzy line when you're talking about traumatic instances that have happened in your life. And she goes on to talk about how somehow we sort of fill in the gaps in between with, you know, certain details or certain parts of the story. And so Eric gives you sort of a rounded feeling of it, that he gives you the information, sort of like what Lucy, you and I do on this show. We give the full spectrum of the story and allow you, the listener, to make up your own mind. And I think that's what Eric had done with this film, was sort of give you a rounded a full circle of this story on all accounts and on all sides, and allowed you to take from what you want or what you believe and make up your own opinion about it. So he wasn't one-sided, and obviously that's not what a documentarian does. So he does give you those other points to it, which are pretty interesting. And for me personally, at some parts of it I disagreed with or wasn't happy with what was portrayed by some of these experts. So, but that's my opinion. But, you know, you guys go out there and, you know, get this DVD, which he mentions will be out on August 6th from IFC. And I believe he said it's going to be on Amazon and all over the place. You can always go to AmityvilleMovie.com or My Amityville Horror on Facebook. Or you can go to his website, which is, I think, ericwalterfilm.com, and check out and see when it actually will be coming out, or I don't know if there's a pre-order on it. But you should really check it out and watch the film if you're really interested in the Amityville case and understanding what Danny Lutz, his story is, since it has not been publicized fairly well anywhere for almost the last 38 years. But before we go on to the Fan of the Week, Lucy, did you have anything that you wanted to add?
well, I really think everybody really needs to see this. I mean, whether or not you are in, whether you've done any research into Amityville, or even if you've just seen some of the things, because I will tell you now, after this show, after all the research, I feel like I know so much more about what happened and still not know exactly what happened. So it's something that definitely piqued my interest, and I'm not going to stop researching it. And just seeing this film just really, really gave me an insight to the whole thing.
All right, so we got about 5 minutes left. Who is the fan of the week?
Okay, the Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week this week is Kelly Collier of Columbus, Ohio. Some likes about Kelly. He likes chip coffee. He likes Patron tequila. He likes White Castles, traveling, Twinkies, the paranormal, and of course he likes Paranormal Review Radio. Thank you so much for being a fan, Kelly, and congratulations.
Yeah, congratulations, Kelly. And don't forget, if you want to be a Paranormal Review Radio Fan of the Week, just like us on our Facebook page, Paranormal Review Radio. All right, Lucy, hit it.
You notice I said it right this week.
I know. That's why I didn't comment.
Okay, well, you know what? There are certain words that evoke strong images or feelings when you hear them, and Amityville is one of them. Now, whether you believe that something terrifying happened in this home, or that it's a hoax that fooled the public, or is it just a story that Hollywood and the media have sensationalized to sell it, you cannot deny that Amityville seems to always start some kind of passionate discussion, and both sides will always have a lot to say. My Amityville Horror is a film that has given us another glimpse into the events that happened in that house at 112 Ocean Avenue. We want to thank Eric Walter for joining us tonight, and it was an absolutely fascinating conversation. So, one of the best things in life are conversations with friends. So we decided it's time to hear from our friends. Yes, it's time for another open paranormal discussion. What's on your mind? Is there a topic in the paranormal that you'd like to talk about? Is there an experience that you'd like to talk about? Call us next Friday night and let's talk. Now, if you're too shy to call in and be on air, no worries. You can email your question or your topic to paranormalreviewradio@yahoo.com. And, our past caller nights have been awesome, but that's because we've got awesome listeners. We want to thank everyone for listening. We have the best fans on the planet. Thank you, Anthony, for another great show. You are the best. So, to all of you paranormal pioneers out there, keep trailblazing and have a paranormal week. Good night.
Good night, everybody.
Paranormal Review Radio.